Hello and welcome to the show. This is Podcast UFO, and I'm Martin Willis, your humble host. And boy, am I excited about this show. We are simulcasting on YouTube, and we're hoping that that works out well. We never know. And I want to say hello to everyone on KGR Radio. This is our debut show, and it's a good one. And we'll be back every Tuesday night at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with some great guests. That is a new show time. I know it's a little bit early for the people on the West Coast, but if you get a chance to listen at work, we are safe for work. I think we've only had a couple of guests, put a couple of cuss words out there every now and then. But we are generally safe for work. The new audience, again, I want to welcome you. And also, check out podcastufo.com. We have occasional blogs. We do also accept guest blogs there. And we also have a UFO sightings page, an anonymous posting page. You can remain anonymous if you choose to. And that's also where our podcasts are housed. And I want to thank everyone that supports our show. Anyone can support our show for $2 or more a month. And for that, you get the full archives of our 2-hour podcast over at Podcast UFO. You can play on any media player. So tonight, Alejandro is coming up with UFO updates in just a minute. And we have A-list guests. That's a plural tonight. First of all, we have Dave Marler. He's going to be talking about triangle UFOs, the Battle of L.A. In hour two, we have my good friend, longtime UFO researcher and journalist, and now a film producer and writer, Lee Spiegel. Also, this is real exciting. We have who I consider the number one UFO filmmaker, James Fox, all coming up. So I want to dedicate this show to a wonderful man, and that's Alan Bean. I don't know if anyone out there have noticed, but he passed away May 26. Now, I got to know Alan a little bit because I did an interview with him, and we kind of stayed in touch over the years. I actually interviewed him with my colleague Phyllis back on my Antique Auction Forum podcast I did. We talked about his wonderful artwork. He was very talented. He did moon paintings, even sometimes put moon dust on them. He was really funny and a real nice guy, and we stayed in touch. And so I'm going to be playing a clip with him in just a minute. I want to bring Alejandro in first. Now, Alejandro, there's only a few astronauts left that actually walked on the moon now. I think there's something like 5 out of 12 or something like that. So, but I know you're enamored with astronauts the same way I am, and it was really an awesome pleasure to talk to Alan.
So, yeah, luckily I got to interview the last one, the only, moonwalker I really got to interview. Unfortunately, I never got to interview Edgar Mitchell, but I did exchange a couple emails with him before. But was Harrison, I can't remember his first name, Harrison Schmidt.
Harrison Schmidt, and, yeah. He's one of the
what's
5.
Cool about Schmidt, yep, he's one of the guys really into paranormal topics also. He did this whole cattle mutilation investigation a long time in the past, and actually if people go look at my Benowitz stuff, or you read some of the stuff about Richard Doty and some of this other stuff, he was right in the middle of all of that. So there's some good books about what he did. So very interesting fella.
Hey, I'd like to play a clip of Alan Bean from the interview I did with him. I talked to him about moon rocks. So that's about 2 minutes long. It's a little echoey, but I'm going to play that now, okay? Ready?
I'm excited to hear it.
All right, here it goes.
The FBI got them before I did. I didn't try to get them. I don't even look on eBay, but they called me up and they said, this guy's selling this big rock that supposedly you brought back from Apollo 12. I said, look, why would I give a rock to some guy? I had a rock, which I don't, leaving a little. I'd give it to me. And if I didn't give it to me, I'd give it to my wife, or I'd give it to my son, or daughter, or my aunt, or uncle.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give it to somebody you never even heard of. Yeah. And I said, we didn't have any rocks we brought back. They all belong to NASA and the government. Mm-hmm. As I say, I don't even have one myself. So I run into this, by the way, frequently. I'll meet somebody at a speech or something, they'll say, my uncle has got a big moon rock. I said, I'll say this. Well, did he? Where'd you get it? Oh, I don't know. He got it from one of the astronauts. He knew him because he used to eat at his restaurant. I said, really?
Oh.
I said, well, what size is it? And then they maybe show me a baseball size, in their hands. I said, well, where's the rock now? It's in a safety deposit box.
Oh, wow.
I'm sure that guy believes he has a moon rock, but I can tell you he does not have any moon rocks.
Yeah.
They know where every fraction of an ounce of moon rocks are.
I'm sure. I don't think you'll see them on eBay either.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find that. The FBI got those guys. I said to the FBI guy who called me up and talked with me about it, I said he made a fundamental mistake. He should have claimed that one of the guys that's dead already, 3 of us are dead, that's who brought it to him. Al Shepard gave it to him. Because Al Shepard's dead. I'm sure after I'm dead and gone, there's no telling what they'll claim I brought to him. And I won't be around to say I didn't bring anything like that to anybody.
All right. Well, you have it here on tape now, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll protect
that
you.
Won't deter.
Yeah.
That won't deter people, but it's good that we did.
Yeah. So that's it. And what a great guy he was. Alan actually was on the Skylab back in September 20th, 1973, when they had that UFO encounter. I don't know if you ever saw that. The Skylab UFO was a great big red blob. I think they had it for about 10 minutes. So I contacted him. I said, hey, Alan, I'm doing a show on UFOs. I don't know what you think about that, but would you be kind enough to come on the show and talk about that UFO encounter? And he goes, well, I'm very busy. He very politely declined. So it's too bad. Because yeah, it was this big, organic, huge red blob in the sky, and it was very bright, too.
I'll have to look into that. I'm not familiar with that one. I personally, although this hasn't always been the case, but people like Mark D'Antonio have shown me otherwise, have been able to prove with all of my favorite NASA cases that no, those aren't UFOs, those are something else. So I would love to see that, because personally I don't feel at this point I can point to any picture or video from NASA and say that's definitely a UFO. So I would love to see that one, because I can't recall that, and that's the year I was born, so it could have been the ship bringing me to Earth. That could have been it. Wow. Yeah, you have your ship background. For those people on YouTube, you look pretty awesome. Love the spaceship. Well, that's a great clip. I'm glad I was able to hear it, because you had talked about it. And like you said, I'm a huge fan of NASA. I love NASA. I love talking to astronauts. Astronauts have this ethic about them, this a civic kind of responsibility around what they do, and a wisdom when you speak with them. And it's unfortunate that every time I post a story about a NASA astronaut, people have to talk crap about NASA. But I completely disagree with every single one of you who are talking this stuff, because I'm a huge fan, and I've said this before. I've found that group of people to be some of the most honest people that I've ever met. And I've been fortunate enough to visit facilities and talk with many different staff people who work at different NASA facilities, and they're amazing. Everyone is mind-blowing, and I recommend to people, before you subscribe to any particular conspiracy theory, go meet these people, because often they like to meet people. You can meet these people. You can go to these facilities and ask people about these things, and they love to share their work. So I remember I also asked him, I said, I don't know about you, but if I was standing on the moon, the only thing that would just take over everything I do is, am I going to get off the moon? I'd worry about that the entire time. Like, am I going to get home safely? And he said, no. He says he couldn't do that. He just had to focus on the task in front of him. And I think that's what they do. That's what they do. Yeah. That's what they often say. They've got to focus on the task in front of them, which is wise. And often they'll even talk about, even being able to enjoy the scenery. They don't get much time for that, because they focus on the task. And they even talk about, which makes sense, especially when you're doing a spacewalk or something, that you can get overwhelmed by the view. Oh, yeah. So you do have to focus in order to get what you're doing done, because, of course, most of the tasks that they're performing, or many of them, especially if they're outside of the ship, are kind of life and death situations. They're very important for the proper functioning of whatever craft or whatever they're doing. So they have to pay attention to make sure that the safety is first. But I would have the same concern as you, though. I mean, I even get freaked out flying once in a while when I think about being up in the air in this giant piece of metal. It freaks me out, and I have to, turn on Doctor Who or something like that to distract myself. I would be freaked out the whole time.
I remember my neighbor used to say when I was a kid and I was going up in a jet for the first time, he said, well, they haven't left one of them up there yet. So that did not help. Yet. All planes come down. One way or the other. Anyway, do we have anything? We only have like 4 minutes left for the news. Do we have anything in the UFO updates this week?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Did we talk about the Nimitz thing last time? I don't know that we did.
Not really. Not the recent George Knapp.
No,
we did not
a lot
talk
of
about
great
that.
stuff from George Knapp, and I mean, I think mainstream media is just starting to unpack all of this stuff. But we had this testimony from David Fravor, who is one of the pilots of the jet fighter during this 2004 Nimitz event outside of San Diego. That was part of the New York Times article when they revealed, this Pentagon UFO study. We also had Elizondo, who used to lead that program, talk about this. However, we haven't gotten any official documents. Well, it appears that we have gotten an official document, and I'm actually going to have a story coming out on Den of Geek this week because George Knapp released this document saying it was prepared for and by the military, and some people have doubted that because it doesn't fit a format that they're used to from the military. However, I did talk with Leslie Kane. I talked with several people, even Elizondo said he's not sure this is the same report he saw, but he did see a military report. Leslie Kane said, we did see a report. We vetted this report. We know this is real. She said she's not sure where it comes from, but it probably comes from BASS, which is the Bigelow Group. So it comes from a third party. And Eric Davis, who worked for BASS, the Bigelow group that did this work, he confirmed that I know the people who wrote it. It wasn't a military format because as contractors we can write them in any format we want. They rarely dictate to us the format, and then we submit it in our own format. That's why you see it the way it is. However, Jeremy Corbell, who's a filmmaker working on Hunt for the Skinwalker and Bob Lazar, both cases that are George Knapp cases, that he's very close with George Knapp. He's also been one of the people in contact with David Fravor, the pilot, and Fravor told him this is the most accurate account of what happened that I've seen. So
wow.
The document is pretty much verified. That's significant because this really talks about the whole event, or at least the most important event where they kind of chased this UFO, and it's quite extraordinary. Essentially, they were vectored into this UFO, Fravor and his wingman, during these training exercises by the USS Princeton, who had detected it. When they got there, they saw a disturbance in the water. That's the first thing they saw. Then they saw the object. They were at about 20,000 feet. They came in lower to get a closer look. That's where they both saw this object, which they described looking like a Tic Tac. I mean, it was, one of them described it looking like it was candy coated or a whiteboard that was completely white, elliptical type of object, but rounded edges. Fravor said he went in closer, but as he went in, it seemed to recognize him, and it pointed towards him and then took off at supersonic speeds. He called back to USS Princeton, said, hey, you got this thing on radar? They said no, but then they came back. You're not going to believe this. It's actually at 24,000 feet now, and it's in the area you were training in earlier in the day. Then they lost contact with it. So it moved very quickly, and then the speculation in this report is really surprising. They speculate that perhaps part of this time it was invisible to the naked eye and using some sort of stealth, possibly that there was an object under the water that was making that disturbance in the water that it was docking with. There was a Los Angeles class nuclear submarine plane there that did say they didn't detect anything on sonar, so they don't believe there was anything underwater. But the speculation in the document is that maybe it had some sort of underwater stealth type of technology. So very shocking. It also talked about later in the day, the object, an unknown, was detected again during training exercises. An F-18 flew out there, couldn't see it with his eyes, couldn't detect it on radar, but did pick it up with his FLIR, his infrared camera. For a short period of time, it seemed to be hovering before it flew off. And it's a piece of that video that we've seen on the New York Times article, and that we've seen all over the place. It's that piece of video. Now, that pilot doesn't know if that's the same thing Fravor saw earlier in the day. We don't know much about it, and that does kind of highlight, like you and I talked about, this video is only kind of a side piece of evidence. It's not the big piece of evidence proving anything significantly. Really, the best evidence is stuff we haven't seen, some of it the radar data, but it's also the very credible testimony from these expert witnesses.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to have to cut it short, but we'll be back. I took up a lot of the time with the Alan Bean thing, and I appreciate you letting me do that.
That was great stuff.
So, all right, Alejandro. So we'll be back. We'll be back next Tuesday at the same time, and thanks for adjusting your schedule as well.
Yeah, no problem. You've got a great lineup, so I hope you have a great show. I know you will.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. All right. Okay, thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week. All right, bye. All right, so our next guest, Dave Marler, he's been on once before. He's a hard-to-get guy, and he was kind enough to say that he would be on my debut show here at KGRA. Welcome to the show, Dave. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to speak with you again.
Yeah, I know. I think it's been a few years. And unfortunately,
time flies when you're having fun in the UFO field. Yeah,
and for those of you on YouTube, you can see this great background Dave has, UFO crash site and old movie posters. I love it. And so, Dave, for the person that's not familiar with your who you are, if you have some type of quick little nutshell you can give your background, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I was first introduced to the concept of UFOs when I was 5 years old. Back in 1973, there was a flap or wave of UFO sightings in Piedmont, Missouri, and that's where my father was born and raised. We lived in St. Louis, but I remember at 5 years old, my father and my brothers and my sister piling in the car with thermoses of coffee and binoculars to go down to Piedmont to, quote unquote, look for UFOs, as many people were doing, as it had garnered a lot of local media attention in the St. Louis area. And so I never got a chance to go with them because I was only 5 years old. I was tasked with staying home with Mom, who had as much in the area of disinterest in the subject as my father had interest. And but I remember being a very young, impressionable 5-year-old of hearing the stories. They would come back and talk to people, many of whom my father knew and grew up with in the greater Piedmont area, of lights and objects. In fact, his aunt and uncle had witnessed things themselves that were highly anomalous. And, of course, in the ensuing years, Dr. Harley Rutledge from Southeast Missouri State University launched really the first civilian scientific field study of UFOs and entered into the subject as a skeptic that came away, I hate to say the term UFO believer, but as a scientist, he conceded that there was something highly anomalous. But that was in 1973. Fast forward about 4 years, my sister and husband had a close encounter with a UFO outside Kansas City, Missouri, I was just talking to her this morning about it again, and something that terrified both of them. And so suddenly UFOs hit rather close to home when my own sister, who didn't drink, didn't do drugs, even though it was the 70s, she was as sober a witness as you could ask for. And then years later, in 1990, still having that interest in UFOs, I heard about MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And for over 10 years, I was a field investigator, Illinois State Director, and conducted lots of investigations. And then over time, as you can see in the background, just a small portion, I started collecting a lot of historical UFO data and historical materials. And with that, started investigating a number of areas that I found particularly interesting. And in the past, we've talked about my research on triangular UFOs, and that was a very specific subset that I decided to focus on as I felt it needed to have greater attention brought to it. And In the ensuing years, since we've spoken last, I've been branching out into some other historical cases that, one, I had an interest in, but two, to be quite honest, didn't feel like the cases had been investigated to the depth that I would like to investigate them. And so over the last 3 or 4 years now, I've really been engaged in doing a high-level investigation of some of these historical cases, which hopefully in the next hour we'll get a chance to talk about.
Yes. So why don't we do this, Dave? Why don't we first talk about your research in the triangle UFOs? I remember you were saying that they were up besides lights in the sky, they were kind of dominating UFO reports. I don't know. Is that still the case today?
It seems to be. I haven't ran the latest statistics, and one of the statistics I look at are from the National UFO Reporting Center. And as I always like to clarify, and I think most of your audience knows, those are raw reports. And even Peter Davenport, if he were here on this call, would be discussing the fact that many of these reports have not been investigated. So they're raw reports. We can't speak to the veracity. But I use that as kind of a testing ground as far as what are people reporting, regardless of the validity, what are people reporting? And the vast majority over the last several years, 15, 20 years now, have been these triangular UFOs. And I concede that many of these may be top secret military aircraft. I'll be the first to concede that. However, when people were making statements on the internet that I can't be kind about it, were simply ill-informed or hadn't taken the time to look at the data, I'm reading these postings saying, well, that's all military. That's just the latest evolution in stealth technology. I'm literally sitting here in my research room looking at news clippings from 1957, 1960, not only from the United States, but from the UK, from Germany, Denmark. In fact, one famous wave that I collected information on was from 1957. A wave of UFO sightings in Denmark from 1957, starting in November of 57 into the spring of 58. And the Danish Defense Intelligence Service were investigating these. And I even found a Reuters news clipping that corroborated earlier statements that I had seen in other sources of information, where they were describing large, dark, silent, triangular. The term they used back then were spaceships, triangular spaceships.
That's right.
That was the headline that dominated the news headlines at the time in Denmark. And but they described similar flight characteristics, similar lighting characteristics. In the case of Denmark, over the village of Brohyr, a woman even described these horseshoe-shaped objects flying out of the triangular UFO, which fast forward over the ensuing several decades after that, many witnesses described, even in the Belgian wave, described objects either entering or exiting these triangular UFOs. So we have just a voluminous amount of reports of these triangular UFOs that have striking similarities that not only transcend the decades, but transcend any one nation. So when you look at that body of information, and what I try to do is collate all of that information into a book, and really make the argument that whereas some of the more modern day triangular objects that are being cited may be military, the historical record begs to differ as far as using that as a blanket explanation for all triangular UFOs. And I think we need to be very careful, whether it's UFOs or any other field of study, when we start using terms like none or all. These all-inclusive terms are very difficult. And I think, as most of the audience members will attest, as well as yourself, Martin, the world is shades of gray. There is no black and white. If life were that simple, wouldn't it be fantastic? Yeah. And whether we're talking triangular UFOs or UFOs in general, some of these might be top secret military aircraft, especially today. We don't know what the state-of-the-art technology is. And that's one of the reasons why I like investigating these historical cases, the well-documented multiple witness cases, which we'll talk about later, where looking back to 1950, I think with a fair degree of certainty, we know what military technology was at that period. Yeah. In 2018, we don't know. We have no idea. Unless we're involved in these black projects or compartmentalized projects, we have no idea. And I don't even want to begin to speculate in that area because I would just show my ignorance. Right. So looking back at these historical cases through the lens of history, I think we can ascertain that we didn't have aircraft that could perform right-angle turns at 10,000 miles an hour or hover for extended periods of time. And so that's one of the reasons I like looking at these historical cases. The other one is quite simply, in the last 20, 30 years, we've had new documentation declassified from these early cases from the 50s and from the 60s, and even the Battle of L.A. back in 1942. Some of those documents weren't declassified until the late 70s, early 80s. And it was researchers like Barry Greenwood who really did the lion's share of work in trying to ascertain and request FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to obtain those documents. So even after all these decades, new information can be gleaned from those documents.
Dave, we're right at our break, so we got to take a quick break. However, we're going to be live still on YouTube. So we're coming up on the break. If you're listening, you are listening to Podcast UFO on KGR Radio. And my guest, of course, is Dave Marler. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Okay. If all has gone well, Race is running a break. And
I'd help if I turned my mic on, wouldn't it?
There you are. Hi, Race. So you're running a break right now, right?
Yeah, we're clear, and we've got 4 minutes in this break, gang.
4 minutes, okay. All right. Hey, Dave. So I do want to, some of the things I want to talk about because as we get going here, is the fact that, a number of people tell me a lot of all the time that they think that these things are military. So I want to talk about that.
Sure.
And my thoughts on that in general. But just looking now while we have this break, see if there's anything, because I don't want to say that during this break, but we will be taking questions later on in the chat room for those who are listening on YouTube. Also, if we get a chance in the last hour, I don't think we're going to have time, but we may have time for a phone call or two, but it's going to be kind of jam-packed with all of us. It'll be really interesting with Lee and you and James on all at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things I want to talk about the Battle of L.A. People talk about, the modern UFO movement started, in 1947, but this was 1942.
Right.
And so I'm really curious on your research on that. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But, I want to know, were they actually thinking it was, what were they thinking it was? Were they thinking it was Japan was sending over these weird balloons and stuff?
That was the prevalent theory.
Yeah.
But we can certainly talk about that. And I'd like to talk about some of the spurious material that's been thrown out there by them. I like to say less than reputable researchers that are tossing around these purported government documents that have absolutely no official provenance whatsoever. They've really muddied the water as far as, trying to create a genuine fact-based investigation of this incident. And unfortunately, you get a lot of that pollution, if you will, into the investigation because many people don't know what's legitimate and what's not legitimate, not only in this case, but with the UFO subject in general. And I really hate to see when they bring that baggage in, and it makes it very difficult for well-meaning individuals to try to separate the wheat from the chaff. And
that's kind of like that. It'll turn a lot of people off. Someone that's
absolutely
just getting excited about the UFO topic. And it's really funny how it parallels to what I do in the fine arts and antiques when it comes to people collecting. When people are collecting and all of a sudden they collect something and it's a fake, then they're gone. They're no longer collecting. They turn away. And it's the same way when people get burned with buying into. YouTube is, a real playground for that.
Well, YouTube and the internet, as I like to say, it's a tool, but just like any tool, it can be used or misused.
Right.
And it's sad because as I talk about, I'll be lecturing in Florida this Saturday for the Florida chapter, and we're going to be talking about the Battle of L.A. We're going to discuss for about an hour and a half that case, and like I said, I'm going to try to separate the wheat from the chaff and present facts that they can go back and verify. Not many researchers in this field cite their references. I'll actually be bringing original newspapers from my collection here. I have about a dozen original front page newspapers from February 25th, 26th, the originals, as well as an original photo with the original news teletype, which I've collected, and an original print off the original negative. And there's a whole discussion with the photo that hopefully we can get into, because there's a lot of misunderstanding on this case.
Yeah, because I know the photos has been a real big issue that I'm really excited at, because I didn't know you had that. Wow, that's
Mark,
great.
We're ready to go back, guys. I don't mean to interrupt you here, but
no.
I've got music rolling now, so we're all set to go. If you guys are ready, I can make it happen.
Yep. So tell me, how many minutes do I have for the next break? Approximately
25.
25. Okay, I'm gonna.
Yep. We want to shut down at 56 at 4 minutes till.
4 minutes till 56. Okay, very good. I'm ready to go whenever you want to call me back in.
All right, Marler, you ready?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
All right, gang, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Podcast UFO on KGR Radio. That's kgrradio.com. My guest is the great Dave Marler. I'm real excited about this. We were talking a little bit off break, so we're not going to spend too much time on the triangle UFOs. I want to go into the other research you're doing. But before we take a turn here, I do want to talk about a number of people that have been on this show that have said to me, they're all military. And there's so many reasons to discount that. One of the reasons I think is a big reason that is never talked about, or I don't know if you ever talk about it, but some people are reporting these things to be like a mile wide. I mean, there would be like no instance where our government that I could ever picture would ever make something a mile wide. It wouldn't serve any purpose.
No, and that's one of many valid criticisms with regard to statements like that. Where are these things based? Colonel John Alexander, who wrote the foreword to my book on triangles, he was very impressed with my research. We were at a UFO conference back in 2012, and he approached me. People asked me, well, why did you get John Alexander to write the foreword to your book? Because some people don't agree with John's opinions with regard to the subject. I said, well, truth be told, he approached me. He was really impressed with my research. He said, that's one of the best lectures I've ever heard at one of these UFO conferences in quite a while. And again, because I cite my references, if you question what I'm saying, here's where I got the information. I wish more researchers in this field would do that. But John stated to me, matter-of-factly, in many conversations that we've had over the years, the military, whether it's the United States or a foreign government, military designs aircraft and weapons with a specific mission or purpose in mind. What is the purpose of having mile-long triangular UFOs cavorting about in our skies and, in many cases, hovering over cornfields in the middle of nowhere? The famous January 5th, 2000 incident is a great example. Yeah. In Illinois, I was the lead investigator for MoveOn at the time, and that's what personally kind of really piqued my interest on the subject. And as I'm sitting in these various police stations interviewing these police officers for that case, I was struck with the similarity in their sketches, in their narratives, in their descriptions of how it mirrored what the gendarmes in Belgium 10 years prior were describing. And many of these officers weren't even familiar with that. Most of them, I don't think, were. And I could almost stitch together the narratives between the Belgian witnesses and the Southern Illinois witnesses, and they're essentially describing the same thing. And, especially in that case, Martin, to your question, people say, well, it was sighted near Scott Air Force Base, therefore it was military. It's like, well, first, that's kind of a gross assumption. We have many UFOs reported near many military bases, but that doesn't mean that that's their point of origin. And correlation is not always causation. Just because the military base is there doesn't mean they're responsible for this object. But to your point, most air bases couldn't sustain the landing of one of these objects. Where are these things being based out of? And to my knowledge, and I think I have one of the largest databases on triangular UFO reports worldwide, we have no reports of these things taking off or landing from a military base. They're certainly flying around in the sky, but where is their point of origin? Where are they being based? And to your point, let's just talk basic military logistics. How many people do you have to maintain an F-18? Like we were just, Alejandro was talking about the sightings by naval pilots. You have an entire crew that maintenances that type of aircraft. If you have an aircraft a mile long, do you have any idea the scale, the logistics, the personnel involved in trying to maintain an aircraft that size, let alone the logistics of where are you going to house it, where it's not visible from satellites or from people nearby? So I really have a hard time buying that. And again, we can talk about the modern reports, but we simply can't ignore the historical body of information that exists, where these triangles have been around for a very, very long time.
Yeah,
and
that's right. Go ahead.
And we just simply can't ignore that. You can't arbitrarily look at the new cases and say, well, that's military. And when I put forth the argument, what about these cases from the 50s, 60s? People don't have a response for that. They're like, well, they could have seen anything. Well, why don't you say that about the modern day reports?
Yeah, hey, that's a good point. So a couple of things. First of all, you mentioned the earlier reports. That's something I was going to touch on too. But it seems to be two type of things that people report on them. One is either they're silent, no noise at all. The other is a humming, sometimes a slight humming. Those are the two different things. But I want to tell you about a report that someone wrote me. It was a listener to the show. I don't know if she listens anymore. And she was a young girl in Australia. She was in the, that's where she's from, Australia. She was in the garden with her grandmother, and all of a sudden there was like this shadow, and she looked above, and there was a triangle going over them silently, but it seemed to force them on the ground, like a pressure. She said she felt a pressure and kind of like lay down on the ground in horror. Have you ever heard anyone talk about the pressure, feeling pressure when one was overhead?
No, that's an interesting case, though, because as I often say in my lectures, it's not just the ones that fit the patterns, it's the ones that don't fit the patterns that are particularly interesting. We do have physiological responses to some of these triangular UFOs. Static electricity, the hair standing on end, maybe a slight heat signature where they feel maybe a slight temperature differential from, before, during, and then after the object passes over or nearby. We do have that, and but that's a very interesting one. I was not familiar with that. Do you recall the time period that was involved in?
Well, I think she's in her early 30s, and she said she was like 9 years old. So, going back
so 20 years.
20 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I would be very happy to connect you two together. I can do that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah. I receive a lot of correspondence, as you can appreciate.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I was rather naive when I wrote this book, because my attitude was I want to get the information out there. I want other people to see the historical cases and the patterns that I found. I was completely naive to the influx of letters and emails and information that I was receiving from others after the book was released.
I'm sure.
And a number of people very sincerely told me, both by phone, I had phone conversations with many of these witnesses, and in email correspondence, they said, you know what, for years, my friends, my family ridiculed me because I told them what I saw. And then I got your book, and you gave me validation. I knew I wasn't crazy, but to read of other people that had these sightings, you provided context, and thank you for that. And it really gave a lot of people peace of mind. And again, I was completely naive that it would have any type of emotional or psychological impact on people like that. And it was very gratifying for the work that went into it.
I'm sure. And before we move on, are you writing a second book on triangle UFOs, or are you going to just move on to other things?
No, this is the running joke with my research assistants, my friends that are helping me with my UFO library here. We have a pretty extensive collection, one of the larger private libraries. And the running joke with one of my volunteers, Bob, that's every time he looks at me and I say, well, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, his running joke is, how's the new book coming? I want to write a book on the Farmington incident that we'll hopefully have some time to discuss here. I have a lot of information that people haven't seen, a lot of information that I've been able to cull out of some of the archives and from microfilm, and I've been able to weave some of that together. I have the information. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time to sit down and actually start writing. Besides my career, which I obviously don't do this full time, I have a working job that helps pay the bills and fund the research. besides my job, I've actually been acquiring 2 or 3 large UFO historical collections.
Wow.
Just 2 weeks ago over Memorial Day, I met with researcher and friend Antonio Huneeus in Tempe, Arizona, and Antonio was looking to liquidate some of his research material. So
wow.
I along with my fiance, flew to Phoenix, and we drove back a U-Haul full of 13 large boxes of international case files and UFO information, which are sitting here off camera right now, which I have to spend the ensuing weeks sorting through and sifting through. So,
wow, what fun. Boy.
Well, and you have to seize the moment. I want to write my book, but when these opportunities present themselves,
sure.
One of my big things is preserving UFO information, and to that point, I think we've discussed this in the past. I've secured a working arrangement with the University of New Mexico here, and in fact, I'll have some of the personnel coming here to my research room and looking at the library. But we've entered into a legal deed of gift, and actually, I think this transpired since we last spoke. And when I pass, all this material will be acquired by the University of New Mexico Library for preservation in their Southwest Special Collections archives. And people will be able, generations from now, to go there and go through that material. So I'm very gratified that all of this material is going to be preserved, and that the university, an academic setting, finds historical and other value in this information.
Wow. Dave, how are we possibly going to fit all this information you have in such a short time? We have like 15 minutes before the next break, and then we have the full hour after that. But the Battle of L.A., I want to talk about that. So let's jump into that. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to talk about New Mexico, the Armada there. But let's talk about that. Now, you, during the break, you said something about the original clip. And, well, first of all, quickly, for the person that's not familiar with it, most people are, but that listen to the show, I would imagine. But quickly, can you go over what happened in 1942?
Sure. The early morning of February 25th, 1942, off the California coast, an unidentified radar target was picked up by 3 radar installations, Army installations. An inbound target was tracked for 120 miles moving from the northwest, from the direction of Santa Maria. For any California audience members there, it was coming in from the direction of Santa Maria towards the greater LA area. And this basically initiated an all-out blackout and alert, because we have to provide historical context. This was just 2 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So the great fear at the time was that the Japanese were eventually going to move past Hawaii and do a full mainland assault. So we had radar installations, we had gun emplacements ready for any type of Japanese military incursion that might take place. So that was the prevailing fear at the time. And amongst all of this war tension, we have this unidentified target, which I'm not saying is extraterrestrial. Let me be very clear on that. I think, Martin, you and I have talked many times that when we talk about UFOs, we mean unidentified flying objects. So just for the sake of clarification, this unidentified radar target was moving inbound. Then the anti-aircraft batteries began firing on multiple targets. Now, that being said, there was a lot of hysteria at the time, so we're not quite sure what all the gun emplacements were firing on, and we're not sure what all the civilian and military witnesses were observing. But based on my analysis, we have at least one solitary target, again, responsible for the radar target potentially, that then moved over the Baldwin Hills area of California, was photographed by a news photographer, and there's a whole story which we don't unfortunately have time to get into on that, which I've uncovered. But we have the famous photo that many of your audience members may have seen on the internet. And then the object moved down towards Long Beach and disappeared. 20 minutes after the firing died down, the object came back, essentially based on all of the correlating information through government documents and newspaper accounts. The object reversed direction from the direction it originally come, and then eventually disappeared off of Santa Monica. And so we have radar confirmation, we have visual sightings, we have a military engagement of this object, and we have photographic evidence. Now, the photograph that many people see on the internet, I'm here to tell you, has been doctored. Now, skeptics will immediately discount it, saying, well, there you go, it's not valid information. For the point of clarification, I have a high-resolution scan of the original negative that was secured by Ben Hansen, a friend and researcher out in California.
Yeah.
And for a documentary series he and I were both working on, ironically enough, he was working on an episode for the Battle of LA. I was working on an episode on triangular UFOs. He secured a high-resolution scan of the original negative, and I've been able to look at that and do some basic contrast enhancement. And I'm here to tell you that there is an object in the convergence of these searchlights. It is not the object that many people have extrapolated or have gleaned from the photo that's on the internet. Most people, they describe a circular object with a little cupola or dome on top. In the original negative, if you zoom in and you do basic contrast enhancement, nothing fancy with Photoshop, just basic contrast enhancement, you dim the photo down to where all the searchlights disappear, and what you're left with is this elongated oval-shaped object, and around that are all of these very intense bursts of light, which are the anti-aircraft guns or bursts around the object. Some have even speculated on the object. And what people see as a little cupola or dome on the top is, in fact, and it's very clear, are a series of anti-aircraft bursts captured at the moment the photographer took that photo. And it's unmistakable. I mean, I wish I could share it with the audience, but...
Is that the only photo known?
Well, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, because that always comes up in my lectures. It's the only known photo of that object. But as many people have asked, Dave, do you really think the photographer just took one photo? And my answer is no. In the ensuing chaos, now think of you as a press reporter in 1942. You're seeing this object, the searchlights are converged on it, and they're throwing a barrage of anti-aircraft shells, 37 millimeter rounds, 50 caliber rounds, as well as 3-inch shells at this object. Over 1,400 rounds were expended towards this thing. In your mind, you're thinking, I have the story of the century. The Japanese are attacking, and I'm here to capture photos. I find it very hard to believe. I think it stretches credulity that a photographer traipsed out on a hillside, got a great vantage point, took one photo, turned around and got in his car and went home.
Right.
Somewhere at some time, maybe not today, but somewhere at some time, there must have been other photos, a sequence of photos taken of this incident. Unfortunately, as of right now, to our knowledge, we only have the one famous photo.
Now, have you done research, I'm sure you have, into who the photographer was and his family?
Yes.
Survived family and all that?
Yes. It's nothing conclusive, but if I was a betting man, which I'm not, so what I'm about to say has a lot of stock to it. If I was a betting man, I would say I'm about 95% certain I know who the photographer was. And just to back up for a moment, the original photo I have, which is a doctored one, it's like the one you see on the internet, although it's much cleaner, is an original 8x10 Associated Press photo stamped on the back, February 25th, 1942, and is unique enough to have the original news teletype glued to the back.
Yep.
And it describes a mysterious object that was sighted in the convergence of searchlights and was shot at. The photo came from a seller on eBay. I'd love to say there was some wonderful backstory channel where I worked with a government agent that leaked this information. Unfortunately, I got it off of eBay. Now, that being said, I have many other historical photos from that time period, so I know the earmarks to look for to show that it is a genuine photo. But I reached out to the seller and became good friends with him, and he sold me or provided a series of other photos from this collection. Long story short, I know we're tight on time. The collection belonged to an Associated Press photographer by the name of Ira Goldner. And Ira Goldner lived in the greater LA area in February 1942. We even have on the internet photos posted by the Associated Press of Bing Crosby and his family, Japanese citizens being rounded up for interrogation by LA police. And the attribution on those photos on the internet are Ira W. Goldner. So we know he was an Associated Press photographer. He was in LA in February 1942. And we have numerous other photos from his collection. And it was in this collection that this photo and the news teletype were garnered from.
Interesting. Wow. So I'm sure you've heard all of the skeptical views of what this may be, and I'm sure you've approached it very carefully. Whether it was a balloon, but you're saying it changed and it changed where it was going and then came back, which I feel would be very strange for a balloon to do. What are other people proposing what this could have been?
Well, the most likely explanations that I've heard postulated by the skeptics, it was all attributed to jittery war nerves. There was nothing there. It was just mass hallucination. Wow. People were looking for Japanese planes, so they looked up in the sky and they saw them. That's one explanation.
Well, I'm sure it played a role of somewhat into.
Oh, it did. And as I mentioned earlier, there was hysteria. There were misidentifications that took place. But the one thing I like to say is, if we want to go with that theory, and I try to knock out every possible explanation, I don't look for UFO as the primary explanation when I go into these cases. If anything, it's the last explanation I look for. The fact of the matter is we have a radar target. Now, radar was crude in 1942, I concede that, but we had 3 separate radars correlated on a target moving 120 miles inbound off the Pacific, moving towards the greater LA area. To my knowledge, hallucinations and war nerves can't be tracked on radar. In addition, hallucinations and war nerves can't be photographed. So something was obviously tracked on radar. Something was photographed. What that something is, I don't know. It's a genuine unidentified flying object. But most of the skeptics will attribute it to a barrage balloon that broke loose from its tether and floated around, and that's what people saw. And I would concede that the general shape of the untouched photo is a roughly elliptical shaped object, which does comport with an anti-aircraft barrage balloon. However, the Navy and the Army were at odds with an official explanation. The simplest thing for them to come up with would be to say it was a barrage balloon. It broke loose, was captured in our searchlights, and we shot it down. The problem with that is they never recovered a barrage balloon. There was never a report in any of the military reports, which I obtained through Barry Greenwood's research. There was never a missing barrage balloon. There was never the remnants of a balloon, which these things are very large. You know, they're in excess of 75 feet long. You can't miss a barrage balloon. It's not like a little weather balloon. And to your point, Martin, which is a valid point, a barrage balloon isn't going to move inland from 120 miles off the Pacific, then maneuver around the greater LA area, disappear for 20 minutes, and then circle back in reverse course.
Yeah, so you have to have some strange wind patterns for that to happen.
That's one hell of a balloon, let me tell you.
Yeah. We only have like 3 minutes, so there's no way we can get into your New Mexico. We'll have to save that for another time. But
there you go.
The one thing also on this, I know there were several people that, we got 3 minutes. Several people that actually died, some of them from the shell casings, I believe, and one of a heart attack or something like that. Actually,
surprisingly, none from shell casings. There were injuries, but no deaths attributed to shell casings because, to your point, what goes up comes down. And there was a lot of shrapnel that did a lot of property damage. There's many photos in the original newspapers I have of property damage. The deaths were actually attributed, and I do bring that up in my lecture because a lot of people like to laugh at this case, the skeptics especially. But I do dedicate a slide to the fact in memory of those people that did lose their lives during this incident. But they were unfortunately attributed to vehicular accidents, people trying to drive during the blackout, and they either ran into another vehicle or they ran into an obstacle. And then, unfortunately, but yet no surprise, some were attributed to heart attacks. People were so panicked by this, the wailing of anti-aircraft, sirens, and then, of course, the concussion and explosion of all these anti-aircraft shells threw a lot of people into cardiac arrest, and who unfortunately later died.
Wow. So now this is weird. So 1942, this happens, and so what happens between 1942 and 1947? Do we know of any UFO encounters?
Yes, there are a number, and specifically I would cite, and I just gave a lecture in Roswell, New Mexico last year on this, talking about cases prior to the famous Roswell incident, the Foo Fighters sightings over in the European and Pacific theater of World War II.
Yep.
We had numerous well-documented cases of UFOs and anomalous lights that were seen. So this may have been a precursor to those series of events and sightings. We just simply don't know.
But until Kenneth Arnold had his sighting, there wasn't really too much in the news. I know the Foo Fighters, and I know also in Sweden there were the ghost ships or ghost rockets.
Yeah. Yes, I have some original newspapers from that time period as well, and very interesting. But and that's why I like the Battle of L.A. case, because in contradiction to the skeptics that say people look up because they want to see UFOs, UFOs and flying saucers weren't even in our lexicon in 1942.
Right. Yeah.
So you can take that explanation right off the table.
Yeah. That's what I like about some of the cases that are, like, for instance, the Ariel school incident. They didn't even know of the word UFO or hear anything about it. They had no way to know anything about it, yet they had an amazing encounter. So,
an amazing encounter that I think one of your guests that are going to be coming up will probably have some insight on.
That's right. That's right. So I think we're ready to go into our break. So I want to say we're going to be coming back with James Fox and Lee Spiegel, and our guest now, Dave Marler, will be staying on. So you're listening to Podcast UFO on KGR Radio, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Good job,
Did
Martin. Clear. We've got 4 minutes in this break.
It never amazes me how fast time flies when we talk about our favorite subject.
I know. God. It's really like there's so much more to talk about. I'm going to get Lee. So, Rach, you'll get James on your end?
I will.
Okay, I'm going to get Lee right now. And this is live. People are listening to this on YouTube, so they're getting a little behind-the-scenes type of thing going on here.
Well, I apologize to him that we didn't have more time to get into some specifics, but like you said, Mark, maybe a future show.
I would always love. I've been trying to get you on, and you're such a busy guy.
Hello.
Well, that's Lee Spiegel's voice.
Wait a minute. I can't.
You can't hear us?
Talk to me. Am I on?
We hear you, Lee.
Wait. Hold on 1 second.
Well, you're live, so.
I'm live.
Yeah. Oh, you can hear us now.
Lee Spiegel.
I can. Hello, Mr. Hobbs.
Hi, you've reached the voicemail for James Fox. After the tone, leave a message. Thanks.
Oh.
That's not good.
I just connected with him a couple of minutes ago. And
all right, you better text him.
He's supposed to be. Oh boy. Hold on.
Okay. 479 number. I think it's 47.
James.
Hey, James. There he is.
James, you on?
Hello.
Hey, James. How are you? It's Martin Willis. So you're on with a whole bunch of us.
How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm in the edit room as we speak, just working continuously on today, particularly Rua Zimbabwe case, the 1994 case.
Oh, wow. We were just talking about that. Anyway, so James, thanks so much for being willing to do this, because I know Lee's been telling me how absolute jammed you are trying to get this done. And I'm really excited that you could do this. We are on YouTube Live, and we're still on KGRA break.
Okay, great. Well, I don't think I was trying to reflect back at a time when I was this busy, and I'm having a hard time remembering.
So, but, like out of the blue film or anything like that, had you ever been this jammed? You're in the editing phase now, right?
Yeah. We're 98% done shooting, and we've got 3 editors working pretty much around the clock.
Oh my God! Wow.
So 2 minutes, gentlemen. 2 minutes to go back live.
Okay.
So what James is actually trying to say here is he doesn't really need me to come out to California this Saturday and help him complete this thing.
You're just going to be a big distraction.
I'm trying to get Lee out here sooner. I'm like, you need to sit in the trenches with us a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to step out and get a sandwich. We're editing. Remind me to tell you about our edit room, because it's rather, back to the basics, should I say?
Okay, well, sure.
James, and for me, I'm told that while we're doing any editing out there, if I need to have a bathroom break, it's 80 steps to the nearest bathroom.
Yeah, I remember being. I remember what it's like. James, I think I told you this before. I lived in Tiburon for 9 years, and moved back here. I think. I don't know. It's been 7 years now, but I was in Tiburon, so I used to go up your way, Bolinas and your whole area, Stinson Beach and Point Reyes and all that. Really beautiful area.
Isn't it lovely?
It is wonderful, and the weather is just amazing. But I do remember those windy roads going past Muir Woods and all up over the mountain and Mount Tam.
That's what keeps Bolinas and West Marin pure.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Most people can't take those turns, so it. Once you get to Bolinas, you've earned it.
Especially if you're a passenger in a car that's going up the mountain at about 120 miles an hour.
All right, guys, 20 seconds. Stand by, and I'll count you down, Martin.
Okay, sure.
All right, here we go. Stand by.
Yeah,
I'm killing a perfect relationship here.
Stand by. That's my line. You can't steal my line.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's my line.
I know. He says it every other moment.
I literally am standing by right now, just so you all know.
Stand by.
I am. I'm literally standing by.
All right, here we go. Martin, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Lee?
Yes.
Marler?
Yes, sir.
And Senor Fox. Everybody all set?
Hey. Yep.
Yes.
Right, here we go, guys. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Podcast UFO on KGR Radio, kgrradio.com. My guests are David Marler, Lee Spiegel, and James Fox. We got them all on. It worked. How about that?
Unbelievable! I didn't even know the moment. I'm so excited. I thought that Mr. Marler was gonna do the second half. I was delighted to hear that he's on with us now. Hello.
Oh yeah.
Hello, James.
Yeah, he's stuck. He's stuck with us. So, we have a lot to get to, and we have 1 hour here. And I've been talking quite a bit with Lee over the last year. We've had a lot of great conversations. And so, James, what can you tell us about what you're working on?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I'm kidding.
Take care.
All right, that's the end of the show. Okay.
It started about 6 years ago when I received a phone call from Tracy Torme, and I don't know how much you want me to get into it, but he planted the seed of producing the seminal feature-length documentary film on the subject of UFOs that would sort of set the record straight once and for all, sort of high production values, some of the best cases, that sort of thing. And I tried with my last 2 productions to do that. And I felt that while I did fairly well, that there was lots of room for improvement and that I could have done a lot better. And I remember when I finished I Know What I Saw, it was incredibly challenging. Just even once the film was done, to get it sold and get it delivered was incredibly challenging and required raising more funds and very difficult guidelines to adhere to with A&E. But in any case, when I finished it, I remember I was a little disappointed. And, it was broadcast on his channel, and my dad sort of pulled me aside, and he's like, what's going on, son? And I said, I don't know, Dad. I really feel like I could have done a lot better. He said, yeah, but look at what you did do. And I said, yeah, but I was, because I set my sights to get a theatrical with I Know What I Saw. And, but every time I've finished a UFO film, I always say this is going to be my last one. I'm never going to do another one. I just learned not to say that anymore. But anyway, so Tracy called me up about 6 years ago, and he said, God, I saw your movie, and I had given up UFOs, and it's been so long, but I got inspired, and then I read Leslie Kane's book, and how would you like to team up and produce the and I thought, my gosh, this is kind of what my dream has been, and so we decided to launch this film. And we've gone through a lot of partners and funders and backers and names. But here we are, nearly 6 years later, and we're about 3-4 months away from having a really good, solid, rough cut to start shopping. So
I can't wait. Lee has filled me in little things that I have to keep secret, and I'm sure the listeners love to hear that. But I just can't wait for this to come out. And I have said many times, that you have made my favorite UFO movies of all times, Out of the Blue, and I Know What I Saw, both are just top-notch. So I'm really, really looking forward to this. And from what I understand, you have some great funding, and you're doing things perfect and right. So it's going to be real exciting.
It's funny. I was just having this conversation last night with a gentleman who was working with John Mack back in the 90s, and they were going to do something for the Learning Channel, and it was going to cover, among other things, the Rua Zimbabwe case. And he had been given, because he was working with John Mack, he'd been given all the original tapes and material that John Mack had. And of course, the project kind of fell apart. And then, John Mack looked the wrong way and was run down in England.
Right.
And so the whole project was dead. But I bumped into this guy, literally bumped into him on the street in Colorado, and we started talking. And long story short, he's now been helping out with the Rua case because it's been something that he started 20 years ago, and he's really excited to get involved. But he pulled me aside last night, and he said, "Gosh, I'm so impressed with the production values. It looks like 60 minutes, or And I said, "Well, that's no accident, because when I Know What I Saw was finished, we were shopping it, and Lionsgate was going to pick it up. And I couldn't have been happier. Obviously, the money would have been great, but the level of global distribution would have been phenomenal for the cause." And at the last minute, they pulled out, and they said the production values were subpar, which they kind of were. And so I said to myself that very moment, back in 2008, I'll never make that mistake again. So one of the things that's really going to stand out in this film for a lot of people out there are the production values. We hired top-notch cameramen and audio men and lighting men. I mean, there are some occasions where we were kind of in the trenches in foreign countries where things didn't go perfectly well, but for the most part, it's really beautiful to look at. The production quality looked like, Frontline, 60 minutes. It's great, and I'm really happy that we could do that, because I feel like the subject has been lacking, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. I'm going to bring Lee in just a minute, but one thing before I do, I want to ask you. I know that it started out. A lot of people have been talking about the name of the film, and they started saying, "Is it 701?" It's not 701 anymore. I know you have kind of like you're working with a title to the movie. Is that something you can talk about? And before you answer that, is it still going to have the theme of the 701 cases, or is it just changed tack completely?
Well, the only thing that it was never intended initially. The reason why we chose the number of 701 was because of the amount of cases. I think it's 5,118. Was it? Correct me if I'm wrong. They were investigated by the United States Air Force from 47 to 69, and out of which 701 remained unexplained. Mm-hmm. It might have been more. Anyway, but in any case, it was that stubborn, small percentage of cases that seemed to defy a terrestrial or prosaic explanation, and that's why we thought that would be fitting for the film, is that what it represents. Not necessarily some of the cases would be from the files from Project Blue Book and the like, but we're looking for a different title. So we have a working title of UFOs, What We Now Know. Again, that's just a working title.
Right. Okay. So, Lee, what has been your role in helping with this film?
I am executive producer, director, scriptwriter, music creator.
Cameraman extraordinaire.
Well, when
bottle washer, you forgot that.
Bottle washer, yeah, I've got some bottle washing. When James first
tripod transfer technician.
Oh, okay, that's okay, yeah. That's going to be too crowded for my business card. I can't do that. When James first asked me to even come on board with the team, I couldn't because I was still working and writing for the Huffington Post.
Sure.
And it would have been a conflict of interest for me to continue writing for them and also to be writing with James. And almost exactly a year ago, I became one of about 2,100 people who fell victim to a gigantic layoff at a big company that involved AOL, Yahoo, Verizon, and HuffPost. Too many people doing the same kind of jobs, and so they luckily said goodbye to me. And that same day, I called James, and I said, "Are you still interested in having me work on the script?" And he said, "Why? Did something happen?" I said, "Yeah, I just got laid off." And he wouldn't stop laughing uncontrollably, like he's doing now.
Yeah.
He apologized. He said,
"I couldn't disguise my level of excitement because that was the one thing that was getting in our way to combine forces."
Yeah.
And it was great. And I said, "Yeah, I'm ready to jump on board now." And I am so impressed with Mr. Fox's passion, not only for the subject matter, but I mean, this man is working 6-7 days a week, sitting at an editing studio, and he's going through, I'm going to say conservatively, thousands of feet or inches or yards of videotape he has shot around the world, not to mention the amazing footage he shot with his two outstanding drones that he's been using. I mean, and without giving anything away, I will tell you this: the opening sequence of this film is going to take everybody's breath away, and that's all I want to say. Yeah, it's so good.
And I know what it is too, and I have to keep the secret. I don't like that. Yeah. So hey, Dave, go ahead, James.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say that there are several pinch me moments for me, and I know for Lee as well. And thank God Lee was sitting right next to me during those times. Actually, at least a couple of them.
Yeah.
But those moments where you're sitting there filming and you're conducting this interview and you're thinking, how the hell did I get here?
Yes.
How did this happen? Why am I so lucky? And I remember a couple of times, and I quite seriously mean this, I would literally pinch my leg to see if I'm dreaming or not. And there are definitely a couple of moments like that in this film.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have people who we've already interviewed. They're in the can that are amazing, from politics to military to science to law enforcement. Just an incredible array of people who just wanted to come forward and get something off their chest, as so many people have not felt that they could for so many years. And we're in a really good position to present this film, and it's going to be a little different from other documentaries. We're not out there making claim that the United States government or the governments of the world are just been lying to us, for their own purposes, and it's a gigantic conspiracy theory. No, we leave that to other folks who want to put that into their documentaries. We're going in a different direction, one that I think people will resonate with when they see this.
Wow. We have the drone picture when you were up on Mount Tam showing now on YouTube. So, speaking of getting things off their chest, I'm going to let Dave Marler ask you a question. Dave, do you have a question you'd like to ask them about this film or anything else?
Yeah, how did they make me look in the segments they filmed with me?
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Well, we had to blur your face out because we said it was top secret.
I couldn't pass that one up. Martin set me up for that. So.
Yeah.
No.
The only part of David's section in the movie is, yes, we had to blur his face out so that we could be really clear with all the filing cabinets behind him that have all the archival material he's gathered.
No, you're going to be. Wait a minute. Is that David Marler? Wait a minute. But we disguised your voice too, so we see your shoulders quite well.
Yeah, but Martin, for the sake of you and the audience, just had a wonderful time having James come out and spend a weekend here. And I was just happy and gratified that we had a lot of historical material here that he was able to utilize for the production. And Lee had a chance to review much of that as well, and Lee and I have talked about that as well.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that James and Lee have woven this fabric, and I think that's a good way to describe it, where they weave in these narratives, these cases, this information, and data. And we're literally
bringing parts of your archive to life. It's so incredible. David Marler's archive is just, it belongs in a museum, but and eventually it might end up in a museum. But I was so impressed at all the original newspaper headlines and all the audio files that you have. It's a treasure trove. All the people that have been working on this film with me are going, where did you get this stuff? This is insane. It was this guy, David Marler. But listen, on top of that, something else I'd like to share with you guys is that we have offered to pay for, this has been going on for about 6 months, to digitize and transfer all of Kufo's material. So we're nearly done now. Yep, and we've uncovered some gems there that just are so precious. Never before seen footage of Hynek, and just a number of incredible interviews from the 40s and 50s and 60s, as well as, I don't know, Lee, we could. Well, I don't know. Do we want to talk about the United Nations stuff? Or?
Well, I it's so close to my heart because I produced this, what's been called a milestone UFO presentation at the United Nations in 1978. And for all of these years, I have been kind of searching in the little nooks and crannies and corners to find footage, as much footage as I could of the presentation, because I wasn't given the footage as I was promised by the country of Grenada back then. And so we've been looking and looking, and all that I'm going to say is, if I was wearing a hat right now, I would tip it to a young lady named Kelly Fox. Kelly is James's sister. She's been doing amazing work going through archive organizations to find us things for this documentary. And a few months ago, James called me one day and said, "What have you been looking for like 40 years that you've been frustrated and haven't been able to find and to be able to share with the world?" And I think I said something like, "Well, I've already got a beautiful woman, so..."
That was a good answer. Yeah.
Thank you. And I said, "Okay, don't tease me." He said, "Kelly found all of your United Nations footage."
Oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. I bet you looked a little different too. I saw the pictures.
Oh yeah. My gosh. I did like a somersault, because it took so much out of me to actually see these people, Alan Hynek, Jacques Vallée, Army Captain Larry Coyne, telling the United Nations about his harrowing helicopter experience in 1973. And I hadn't seen any of this footage in the last 40 years. And now we have a possibility of getting it.
That is amazing. James, I think you're getting a little crosswind there. Did you have something you were saying, Dave?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, that is better. James, let me ask you this question. What has, since the Pentagon story came out on December 16th, and I think things have changed quite a bit since that time. Have you had to adjust anything or change anything since that has happened, or have you taken any new tacks on what you're doing because of that article and people taking this more seriously these days?
When you say have I taken any more new tacks, you mean like Tic Tacs?
We were talking about the Nimitz earlier. Yeah.
Like that, right? Yeah. No, it's funny actually, because I remember when I put together a proposal, a financial proposal for the third investors we got on board, and how do you account for something, without knowing that? And so I just said, something's going to happen. How are you going to end this? I said, I don't know. Something's going to happen. It will. It always does. And when it does, we'll document it. And I put a little extra budget in for that. And then lo and behold, the cover of the New York Times happened. So I predicted something would happen, but I didn't predict something that good would happen. Do you know what I mean?
Right. So with that happening, you have actually changed some things in the film, right mid-film, right? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here. Yeah, yes, we're covering that event. Yes.
You're covering that event.
So,
wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's not going to be, it'll probably be just a few minutes towards the end, but I think it'll open up a window of government transparency unlike we've ever seen in America.
Yeah, and it might be that you might be sensing that perhaps James and I are just resisting a little bit, telling you much more.
Yes, you are.
And normally, historically, I'm the guy who stands up on a soapbox and says, I hate it when people tease the public for claiming that they've got this and that. And
no, it's my turn now. Yeah.
Yeah, see? And so I get that. But this is not the kind of tease where, like the other people tease, where they never produce a payoff. And there's the difference. We're going to give you a payoff. And so we're just keeping it as close at hand as possible so that we can feel free to finish this thing and then put it out there so everybody can see it. And then I'll sleep for a year, and James will be able to take care and raise his young son for the next 5 years without distractions.
I'll sleep for 2 years.
Yeah, sleep for 2 years. Yeah.
No, it's like we're not trying to deliberately keep it a secret. No, we're not. I will say this: for all the people out there who almost daily say, "Well, disclosure, it's right around the corner. I can taste it. It's happening. The truth is going to..." No. Folks, take a deep breath, everybody. First of all, I don't believe any of us here on this show right now will actually be alive long enough to hear or know the ultimate truth about UFOs. And as far as disclosure, hey, folks, if you do the legwork, you got to go out there and do some research. You will find disclosure has been happening for a very long time. You just got to look for it, and you'll find it.
Right. James, going back to the topic of the Pentagon, the New York Times story, do you believe that you'll be able to sell the film easier because of that?
Having sold all 3 previous films within 6 weeks of completion and looking at this film now, there's just no comparison with this film and the other films that I've done. I've got a few people in the industry that are just champing at the bit to put this thing into the right hands. So great. I think that it's going to make the other cases that we're featuring in this film that much more credible. To have this program come out and the people that were behind the program coming out, validating the existence of UFOs. I think that's going to be a tremendous boon for the film, no question about it. And certainly in the marketing, people are keen to know more at this point. So I'm very excited about that. And I like I said, the handful of people that I just had a couple of friends that, oh my God, this guy's doing, you got to come over. So I occasionally I'll invite a few people in the edit room, and I'm telling you right now, these people's jaw hit the floor, and they just walked out of here in a trance. So like, oh my God, I can't believe this film is coming out. Like,
wow. Now, would you?
I thought to myself, well, we're going to deliver. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Now, would you consider the format basically a documentary, or is it kind of like a mixture of how you'd classify it?
Well, if any of you out there have seen I Know What I Saw, it's similar in the fact that it's got pretty solid cases, vetted cases from around the world. But this is even more international. But it's a lot better shot, a lot better researched, and we're going to do a much better job with a narrative that will stitch these stories together in a compelling and exciting way. But then everything will have a purpose. It won't just be banging the view over the head, case after case after case. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I hope I answered your question. But do I feel like that will help sell the film? Yeah, absolutely, I do. But I feel like it will sell with or without that. I mean, it's about the closest I've seen to disclosure ever. It's going to be. I can't see how it's not going to stir the pot. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. Well, I had Selma Siddiq from the Ariel School incident on my show, and I'm telling you, I had goosebumps talking to her. That's just, to me, I'm glad that case is going to be part of it, because that just is such an incredible case, and and what they saw and everything is just amazing. So I was really glad to hear that was going to be part of the film.
Hey, well, it's so funny because. Oh, good.
Oh, I just wanted to add, James, that I want to let Martin know that James and Lee have shared some of the clips with me, both shot with myself but with others, and in discussing the material, and Lee and I have had many discussions on this. I just want to commend James and Lee for their vetting process. Martin, you and I have talked many times about this field. There is everything from credible to crazy and all things in between. And I want to commend Lee and James for their vetting process. Many times you see productions, or you hear a lecture, or you see this or that presented in the UFO field, and you say, you know what, that's really good, except for the fact they included that person, or they included that case.
Yes.
And just from what limited information they've shared with me, what I've seen thus far, and I have zero tolerance for craziness in this field, there is no weak link. They have no weak link. And they make a compelling argument that I would task any of the most ardent skeptics to watch this documentary and come away and still feel the same way that they did before they came in to see it. So I just want to commend Lee and James for their work in that regard. This field is striving for credibility, and both James's previous productions as well as this one hits the mark, and it hits the mark big time.
Right.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, David. And you know what? Right back at you. While you're handing out compliments, I want to say that David Marlar is like a walking encyclopedia of UFOs. It's not just that he has hundreds of filing cabinets with folders in them with papers and correspondence and pictures. You go up to this guy, or you call him. If I call David any day of the week and say, David, listen, what do you know about 1973 Pan American 747, he'll suddenly stop me and he'll just tell me the entire case, the names of the pilots, the names of every passenger on the manifest.
Their dates of birth, who they married, when they got a divorce.
He is so thorough. He is a walking encyclopedia. I feel like every time, David, that you've received a new file or information, as you're thumbing through it, I can hear the clicking of like a camera in your head. Click, 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 and it's going into another filing cabinet of your mind. That's how good he is.
Well, thank you. But to demonstrate that, I think James was witness to that when he was here filming, because he was asking about this case and that case, and I'm literally running around pulling files out of various file cabinet drawers. And as I like to say, it's great to have all this information, but if it's not organized and if you can't readily retrieve it, there's no point in having it. So thank you.
Well, it was so funny because I've been working with this other guy who's a really good editor. His name is Ben, and Ben will, I'll put him on a certain task, and a couple of weeks ago he comes back. He goes, "There's this guy, like David Marler. He knows it all. Like I just put him on and roll it." I said, "Well, yeah, that's his archive." He's like, oh my God. It was so funny because there's a very complex period that I think leads nicely up to the Socorro incident in 1964. But a bunch of things that build to that. So by the time you get to Socorro, New Mexico in 1964 with Lonnie Zamora, that case just becomes that much more palatable for, I think, mainstream, because we've built our case with these prior incidents, which I knew very little about.
And I'm really I'm really glad that James recognized that, because I've lectured before on the fact that there are these precedents for Socorro, namely Levelland, Texas, Alamogordo, these other cases describing essentially the same scenario that played out. And many of these involved law enforcement and military. In fact, James, I believe, will be including an actual radio broadcast involving the public information officer from White Sands Proving Ground, where he states that military personnel witnessed the landing of this UFO and the takeoff of this UFO. I mean, this is the actual public information officer. And two statements made earlier, he's able to marry those vintage radio newscasts with the original newspapers. And I think James sent me a clip, and I told James in response, I texted back, I said, you make this material dance. It just dances together so seamlessly. And I know Lee has been looking at some of those clips as well. And, it's a testament to James and his creativity that he's able to marry all of this material and make some sense out of it, because there's just so much to sort through.
It was so much fun.
James, are there some that might, some of these incidences and some of these takes that may be cut out in the editing that you're like on the fence about, or do you think you've captured everything that's going to stay in the film?
I think it's going to have to be a 7-hour odyssey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's not lying. He's not lying. We already have enough for more than a 2-hour presentation at this point.
I said to Lee, this film has got to do really well, Lee, because you and I we got to make a film on just Socorro, just Australia, just South America, just China, just Rua. I mean, each one of these cases has so much depth and complexity, and it's like, where do you have to be very selective. But I did say, to Lee, we should seriously consider doing like an 8-part series on a full hour on each one of these cases.
Wow,
because the material's there.
Yeah, it's amazing. And James is one of the few people in America who was invited recently to go to China and to film amazing interviews and get footage of UFO activity in China. And our technical advisor on the film, who is Jacques Vallée, was very anxious for James to go to China, because Jacques would say to us, we don't really know anything of what's going on coming out of China. And James went out there with his sister Kelly and his cameraman David. They were out there for a little over 2 weeks and came back with amazing stuff. And stuff that no one has seen before. And, just getting through the translation process is also a challenge.
Wow.
Yeah, no, editing is always hard, but then you got to edit in Chinese. Like, really?
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's just, we got to China. I knew very little to nothing. I mean, I saw a few things on the internet in the last 5-10 years, but for the most part, I knew nothing about UFOs in China. Then I found out there was this amazing landing case, just like Rua. There weren't as many witnesses. Mungjiaogua, 1994, same year as Africa, 1994, landing case in China. Everyone in the Chinese UFO, the UFO organization that we connected with, was officially recognized and registered with the Chinese government, which is sort of a tacit way of them saying, we support this research. They had a monument that must have cost over $10 million. Stunningly beautiful monument of a flying saucer overlooking this whole city.
Yeah.
Not just a rinky-dink little, this is a substantial thing you can climb up into, and spiral staircases. And, I mean, it's stunningly beautiful. Like, you know, who would have thought? You know what I mean?
Wow.
Witnesses all over. Anyway, so that was really nice. We conducted an interview on the Great Wall of China. How cool is that?
Isn't that amazing?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's beautiful and all beautifully shot. It's going to be so exciting. And I flew my drone in China. We actually went around with a Chinese general, because you can't fly a drone in China, man. You have to get a permit. You'll go to jail.
Oh,
but we had
sure.
we had a general. With no joke, man. People said to me, no, you are not. Don't even think about it. Like, especially in Beijing. But we had a general with us, and he literally was like, "You got my authority. You go ahead and fly that thing." I was like, "Okay." So I flew my drone. I got all this great footage in China with my drone. So that's all going to be included in the film as well. So
wow.
It's going to be very, very international, you guys. It's, you know, South America and Australia and China and Africa. And
now,
yeah,
speaking of Australia, James, that's I find that a country with only 26 million people, that they are the third most, the largest audience that I have for this show. Is there a lot going on there that you're aware of in Australia?
Well, I tell you, what's fascinating was that there was a landing case that happened in 1966. In fact, it was in April 4th, 1966, April 4th or April 5th. But it was right after we had the congressional hearings in the United States.
Right.
That symposium. I mean, literally, like, I don't know, I'm trying to do the math, but it's like 15 or 16 hours after that event happened in Washington, D.C. There was a landing in Westall, which is just outside of Melbourne, a suburb of Melbourne. Westall Primary School, which is, I think, ages up to 13, 14 years old. And there were roughly 250 school children in broad daylight that watched a flying saucer, and maybe more than one flying saucer, whiz around in the sky above the school and then go down behind some trees and land.
Right.
And it's like...
Yeah, what a case.
I'm sorry?
I said, what a case that is. Yes.
What an amazing case, We went and met up with a lot of the witnesses. We met with some of the witnesses that jumped the school fence during, recess time, and ran over to where this thing would landed and saw it sitting on the ground and came within 10 feet of it or 8 feet of it. I mean, it's just remarkable stuff. Quite similar in many respects as the case that happened in Rua, Zimbabwe in '94. But we only had one account of potentially something that was seen, but that came in kind of late. CE3, for the most part, as far as we know, it's not. It was just a close encounter of the second kind, but it did land.
Now there was a rumor that a teacher had taken some pictures and the camera was confiscated. Is that?
That's what.
Did you find that to be so?
Yeah, they even mentioned her name. I didn't include it in the cut because it's just a rumor. But the student said, "Yeah, Mrs. Blah 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 grabbed the camera and ran out and snapped off some pictures." But the military arrived at the school moments after and cordoned off the landing area. Told the media to stop filming. They told the principal to tell all the students not to talk about it as if it never happened. They were all threatened. The teacher, who was a witness, hadn't spoken in 50 years, and we managed to have a meeting with him, and then he went on the record and told us why he didn't talk for the last 50 years. This is incredible. It's incredible stuff.
Excellent.
Incredible stuff. It's just one piece of the puzzle,
Yeah, it's one of the great ones. I did speak to Shane down there about that case. Just can't recall his last name, but
Shane Ryan.
That's him.
Shane Ryan.
Yes. Yeah. What a nice guy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, those guys were so helpful. I could never have done any of it without them. Yeah. And why am I James Rigney, Shane Ryan, and then a lot of the witnesses. Yeah, it was a wonderful trip.
Getting back to
I ate a Vegemite sandwich too. I really did. I was like, I got to eat a Vegemite sandwich. I'm sorry, but
I just thought that was part of a song. I didn't know that really existed.
I did it with a smile too. No, Vegemite. Yeah.
How about that?
It was cool.
Getting back to China, because I know so little about what is going on. I was in touch with a professor over there that was trying to fill me into some interesting cases, but you never hear about anything. In general, it sounds like they take the UFO topic on a serious note, and I'm kind of surprised at that. Do you think that's nationally, or do you think that's just regionally? You said you were in Beijing. Do you think it's, for the most part, regional, or what?
No, well, it's difficult communicating. When I was there were lots of, a lot of the social media platforms were not available in China, so that could be one reason. And things are changing now, but I couldn't check emails, and no Google searches, no Facebook, none of those normal social media platforms that we utilize everywhere else, and so that certainly could be one thing. But I mean, we flew all across China, lots of different areas of China. We took trains and planes, and I was amazed at how prolific the UFO organization was, and how widespread it was, and meeting witnesses in different parts of the country, and their willingness to talk openly about it. And there didn't seem to be any effort from the government to shut any of that down. As in fact, what I was telling you earlier is that the organization that I would say sponsored us, that opened their doors for us, was officially recognized by the Chinese government. And so that, because when I asked the question, like, well, does the government deny? And they said the government doesn't deny, but doesn't really confirm either. But the fact that they put a legitimate stamp of recognition on our organization, that's sort of a tacit yes. We support this nature, this research.
Excellent. I also want to say that maybe some of you or all of you remember, just a few years ago, I wrote some stories for the Huffington Post about there were sightings in China of strange objects that caused a couple of airports to shut down. And
oh yeah,
you remember that?
I remember when you wrote that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just one airport. There were some regional airports where something was seen over like the end of one runway, and they actually stopped air traffic for a while until there was no object there. And the stories came out, could have been like the re-entry of a rocket into the atmosphere, and this stuff was all over the news. And so we had plenty of footage to show in articles and on the 6 o'clock news. But for a short period of time, China UFOs were in the news, and nobody seemed to be laughing about it, is what I noticed at the time.
I think we are in an era that there's going to be less laughing at it. At least I hope so. I feel myself, just personally, I feel not so guarded. And I have to attribute that to, what happened with the New York Times article coming out, and of course that roots from Tom DeLonge. A lot of people don't want to hear that or don't want to talk about it, but he actually did some groundwork that made that happen. We have to acknowledge that. Lee, I know you had. You and I were talking about that a while ago. Like, not much seems to be happening. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that, or.
Well, I mean, I'm not on the inside of that whole group, the To the Stars Academy. I, like many other interested citizens, I've been waiting for this group to come out with something, some kind of a payoff, more information. Give us some guidelines. What else have you discovered? Is the Pentagon really going to release more footage of things? But it seems to be almost like we're in the calm before the storm. I'm waiting, as I've spent so many years waiting for follow-up information, and in the past, historically, it's turned out that there hasn't been follow-up information. I hope that's not the case with DeLong's group. It's a very interesting group of people, former military and intelligence organization people, and I would really like to see something. I don't feel like James and I are in any kind of competition with people like that. I want all of this information, whatever the information is going to be, to come out, or at least as much of the information that we can handle. And that's another factor in this whole disclosure. How much of the truth, the so-called truth, can the citizens of this planet really handle?
And Martin, if I could jump in here real quick, just piggyback some of Lee's statements.
Yes, do.
There's been a lot of dialogue on the internet with regard to the Pentagon program. Lee and I have talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think that gets lost in the discussion, people get mired in the details, like, well, the F-18, it was at this location, but the audio doesn't correlate with that.
Yeah,
people get bogged down.
Yep.
Yes, and we get bogged down in the details. I'm kind of a big picture kind of guy. That's how I always kind of talk about myself with regard to the UFO subject. I'm looking for patterns in the data. I also like asking certain hard-hitting questions. Let's just put all the details off to the side for a moment. The one question I don't often hear asked by UFO researchers is, why now? We have decades-long denial of this subject. There's nothing to this subject. It's not a threat to national security. The Air Force, Project Blue Book, had their party line, right? There's nothing to this. We're investigating it, but we found nothing that indicates technological advancement or technology beyond our state of the art. And not just the United States, all world governments, all world military have consistently denied that there's anything to this, yet they continue to investigate it, which is an interesting contradiction, but that's for another discussion. But my question is, with military, with intelligence, with politics, you always have to question the timing. No one was pressuring.
Stan Friedman asked that question, actually.
Yeah, well, and that doesn't surprise me because, of course, Stan's always asking insightful questions. I love Stan. But, I don't think we ask it enough, though. We get mired in the details. Why are they releasing this now? That is the fundamental, and you can say Tom DeLonge was instrumental in that, but just because he wanted it doesn't mean they had to release it. I mean, they could have sat on this material for decades, and we wouldn't have known about it. So I think we have to ask the fundamental question, to what end, to what agenda does it serve them? Because let's be honest, any military or government, they only do things to serve their best interests typically. Why are they releasing this information now? And I don't have the answer, but I think we need to start asking that question more within these UFO discussions and forums.
I think that's an excellent question. Do any of you have a point on that?
I was going to say that one possible reason for why now is maybe this is a good point in terms of history, where the government, just our government, is kind of testing the waters with its citizens. Let's kind of release a little bit of information and see how the public reacts. Let's see how the media reacts. Will the media continue to drop any UFO stories all the way at the bottom of the 11 o'clock news, after the weather and sports? Well, that whole the whole December Pentagon story was raised a lot higher up than the sports and the weather, and that was an interesting test. I thought that a lot of media was paying attention. James Fox was one of several really interesting media personalities who went on places like CNBC, CNN. James did a great interview on CNN, and I think James was on that interview when they asked you where you thought some of these things were coming from. And I know you don't like to actually say extraterrestrials, but at one point during the interview, you said, "Well, sometimes you're only kind of left with this possibility."
Yeah, right. He's pointing up for those of you just listening.
I'm pointing my finger up.
Yeah. Hey,
well, guys, this is funny because I remember sitting in a room with a government official, pretty high-level government official, and he was saying, the government should just come out and they should just do this and they should do that. I said, well, wait a minute. I said, you are the government. You were the government. So what are you talking about? Who are you talking about? He's like, well, presidents are kind of kept out of the loop. And I guess what I'm referring to is the intelligence agencies. So apparently one of the things I'm learning, I've always sort of suspected this, but the intelligence agencies can decide on what's released and what's not released. So even if the president tries to get something released, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to have access to it because they just hide it from him. So when we're talking about this recent revelation on the Pentagon UFO program, which quite honestly, my personal belief is it's one of many, it just happened to get revealed. And everyone's always said these agencies are very compartmentalized and they compete with one another, that sort of thing. But if you have anomalous objects whizzing around in the airspace, right, and you scramble jets to intercept and you're unable to do so, that would be an issue of national security, right?
Yes.
And one of these guys said to me, yeah, so I guess there must be a secrecy clause somewhere in these agencies that if it affects national security, it won't see the light of day, right? And so I remember talking about some of these video clips from the F-18s, I guess the cockpit cameras they were having when they were chasing these UFOs. And I thought, gosh, these pilots are talking about these objects performing maneuvers that are just, making a joke out of their F-18. Where are those maneuvers? It's like, well, those were extracted from the release because they exhibit flight characteristics that are an issue of national security. Isn't that kind of funny? It's like, basically demonstrating that there are objects that fly rings around our fastest planes, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that can't be released. So it's, they seem to be, I don't know. I don't know what agency would have authorized the release of that information that ended up on the front page of the New York Times. Was it the CIA? Was it the DIA? Was it the NSA? Like, who was it?
Wow. Yeah. Listen, we only have a few minutes left, and I'm going to ask if you gentlemen don't mind hanging on afterwards, after I close the show, just for a minute, because there's some questions that have come in that I'd like to answer with people, if that's okay, just like a few minutes after, if that's all right. So
I'm good with that. I'm good.
Sure. Yep. We have like less than 5 minutes left. Someone in the chat room just asked if there was any credible evidence to the Gate C-17, the Chicago O'Hare incident back in 2006. That's what I'm recalling. So I don't know if anyone wants to take that in particular.
I don't know all of the exact details of that case, but I have never read or heard any hard-nosed skeptics or debunkers come up with a real logical, workable explanation of what a lot of people saw that day over O'Hare Airport with this saucer-shaped thing. It was like underneath very cloudy sky, and then in front of a lot of people, it just went straight up and it punched a hole through the clouds, and when the object was gone, the hole was still there. I mean, do we have anything that can do that?
You guys, it was 2008 January, and I was in Arizona. I was in Arizona, Phoenix, and I was doing some follow-up interviews for what I thought at the time was going to be a re-release of Out of the Blue. Turned out to morph into I Know What I Saw. And I get a phone call from CNN, and they're like, in fact, we had tickets to go to O'Hare Airport and see what we could turn up from that incident, because it just happened in 2006. It was like only 2 years. And I was in touch with a couple of United Airlines personnel, and I was actually talking with them over the phone, and they confirmed for me they all saw it. This thing hovered there for quite some time. Some pilot took a photograph of it. I don't know what happened to that photograph, but that these guys would not come. He said to me, literally, the guy said, if you can guarantee me that I'm not going to lose my job, or that you cover my paycheck if I do lose my job, that's the only way I'm going to come forward. Because the United Airlines said unequivocally, you talk about this publicly, you're fired.
All right. Well, let's address that real quickly. So, how long does someone stay in the airline, field? They could drop out. Why can't they talk about it? If they're a waiter now, or if they're cutting hair or something.
They could. Oh no, I'm sure they could. It's just a matter of following up, with these people. Look, I tracked down. I'll never forget this. I actually learned a little Japanese. I tracked down Kenju Terachi. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly. He was the pilot in 1986 with the FAA stuff with John Callahan.
Right.
John Callahan said to me, "I'll only come to your National Press Club." Yeah, JAL, exactly. Thank you. And I'll only come to your National Press Club event if you can get the pilot to come and testify as well. Well, that was like 1986. This was 2008. 2007. I thought, well, gosh, that's a long enough time where he'll kind of come forward. So I hire a private investigator. I get his phone number. Long story short, get his phone number. I learn a little Japanese so I can introduce myself. I get his wife on the phone, and I introduce myself in Japanese. I had it all written down, and she said, "No, talk about an incident." Click on the phone up.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my God. I'm like, no. I just paid.
Well, at least you learned some Japanese.
To find you.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. I think we're really close to the end of the show, just to let you know. It's time to wrap. So if you'd hang on, everyone, just hang in. But I want to say goodbye to our KGRA audience, if you would. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So I'm just going to close out real quickly here. All right. So that's it for the show and for KGRA. I want to thank you all for listening over there. So I just wanted to know real quickly if anyone, if you guys are up for taking a call. I mean, we're still live on YouTube. If you'd like to take a call, let me know. Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Sure, yeah.
Why not? Okay. So anyone can call in right now if you have a question for any of our guests. You can call in. But I feel like I could talk like another 3 hours, and I know you, especially James, you are really pressed to move on. But is there anything else you can tell us, James, any other particular story that's included in this movie that you just learned more new information that you never knew about and was kind of blown away by it? Is there anything that comes to mind? James, are you still there? I think.
Oh, did we?
I think we might have lost James.
Oh no.
So Lee, I'll toss that over to you.
Wow. There have been, yes. To answer your question, yes. There have been a number of instances where in the course of doing an interview with someone very prominent, where James and I would approach the interview with specific questions that we came prepared to ask, and because we kind of knew that there were certain areas, because in doing a pre-interview, it's always a good idea to talk to someone ahead of time and say, there's specific things that you would rather not talk about, so that there are no surprises, so that the person doesn't feel put off and get nervous, and so I don't like to give away the questions that I'm going to ask, but I at least want the person to always feel comfortable throughout the interview.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of interviews where neither James or I had to ask a question that could have been considered very controversial because the subject of the interview brought it up themselves.
Isn't that great? Wow.
It was like, what did you just say? What? And in fact, one of the people, and I won't say who it is yet, but this person we were interviewing, and he at first didn't. When we first approached him, he didn't want anything to do with being interviewed on camera at all, until he finally, after a very delicate prodding, agreed to talk about certain things. And James and I were blown away, where we sat with this individual for just under 3 hours for the interview.
Wow.
And at one point during the interview, he held up a piece of paper that was in his lap, and he said, I'm going to show you something that I wasn't going to do or plan on doing, but I feel like I should say something. This is what could be called a smoking gun. And it was a previously classified document that pretty much was written by high-ranking officials, and they were trying to spell out the current belief of UFOs. And there have been many documents like that. When I say there's been disclosure, I have found some of these documents. Dr. J. Allen Hynek gave me such a document that we then included in our packet of documents that we gave out to all the nations of the world in 1978 and to the media, because he said, I said to him, I was at his office one day in the middle of 1978 while we were still working on gathering materials for the presentation in November, and I said, Alan, we've got some nice documents here that go back to 1947, but do you I said to him, I was very honest, we were friends. I said, look, you were with the Air Force. You were their official scientific consultant for like 20 years. I have to believe that you had access to some filing cabinets. and the kind of filing cabinets that look like David Marler's filing cabinets.
Oh, by the way, David, Lee told me to tell you that you know nothing about antiques. You didn't even know nothing about UFOs. It's funny I've said that. Nothing about UFOs. As a matter of fact, you didn't even know what the acronym stood for. So,
and if you want to keep it straight, Martin, I told David that you know nothing about antiques.
That's
so let's
right.
keep that straight. Yeah,
that's perfect.
Well, the funny thing is, a slip up, Martin, on that is that I also have a lot of antiques in my house. So when you started to say that, I'm like, how did Lee even know I had antiques?
That's right.
Oh, that's funny. I can't believe I slipped that up like that too.
That's okay. Okay.
Yeah. Someone wanted to know what, and we're going to take just a couple more minutes here. So if anyone wants to call in, they're welcome to call in. The number's up on the screen on YouTube. But Bambi wanted to know, what effect has Hollywood had on the disclosure project? In other words, since the article has come out, I guess that's what she means, on the New York Times. I haven't seen anything really change that much. Or maybe she's wording it, has that made any, I think maybe she's asking, has Hollywood helped as far as people looking into the subject more? I think that's maybe what she's talking about. I don't know if either one of you
are we talking Hollywood as in motion pictures or
yes,
the media?
Like Steven Spielberg's work and things like that. Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think that even before Close Encounters, you take a picture like the original, The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was a totally Cold War era picture of a real flying saucer being tracked by radar all around the world, and it ends up in Washington and landing right there on the lawn in front of the Washington Monument, and this humanoid walks out with his robot companion, and he only wants to talk to, the heads of every country. And he goes through the whole movie up against the political resistance of anybody wanting to talk to him. And so nobody can arrange the meeting that he wants, and he ends up going to the home of this famous top scientist of the day, and he says, nobody at the heads of your governments wants to hear what I have to say. Do I have to do anything dramatic to this planet to get you to listen to me? And he said, well, the scientist said, well, what do you mean by dramatic? He said, my robot back there standing next to the saucer, he has the power to turn this world of yours into a burned out cinder. And the scientist says, such power exists? And Klaatu says, trust me, such power exists. And so the scientist said, well, I could arrange a meeting where all the top scientists of the world to come together. If that would be possible. We wouldn't want you to hurt any people, you know. And he said, "Can you guarantee that?" And Klaatu says, "Well, it's an interesting problem. Would Friday at 12:30 be good for you?" You know.
Hey, we have someone that just called in. I think they. Can you hear me, caller?
Yeah, hello.
I know you tried to call. I tried to answer your call several times. I'm not sure what happened, but what's your first name?
I kept getting busy.
I see. What's your first name and where are you calling from?
Jim, British Columbia.
Hey, Jim.
Welcome to the show. You have a question for Dave or Lee?
Pardon me?
Do you have a question for our guests?
Well, I have something to add. If I may, Monica told me to phone in here, just on the YouTube live chat.
Oh, yes.
What I have to say is that I'm a real science guy. I have a degree in engineering. I've been studying science all my life. I've done science for a living, okay? And I give talks to interpret science to the public and all this sort of thing. And what I have to say about science is that we don't know very much at all. We humans. We really don't know very much, and I've had paranormal experiences myself. I had one sighting of UFOs. I've had a number of other paranormal experiences that are beyond science, far outside of what I know science to be. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all. Just the science point of view is that we really don't know much. Our science is very small, very, very small.
Well, and when you look back historically at like who discovered gravity, who discovered lightning, who discovered all the great discoveries of science, of flight, happened during times of history when there's no way that these people would have survived being stoned by the population because they were talking heresy. You can't talk to us about things like that. No, we cannot have machines that fly in the air, and yet historically, humans have been recording many instances of things flying in the air that are machines. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's no reason why we couldn't tame gravity someday. Our top physicists now are trying to figure out what is gravity. They don't know. My favorite theoretical physicist right now is working on what is time. We don't know what time is.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just seems to be a forward ratchet as far as we know. It ratchets forward and never goes back.
Yeah,
like when you break your leg, you wish you could take that last second back.
One of my interviews that I did in the 1970s and into the 80s with former astronaut Gordon Cooper. And I did an interview of the month for Omni magazine back then. And we were discussing his interest in UFOs, his experience with UFOs. And I said, is there anything going on in science that you and I haven't talked about that you think would be of interest to me or to my readers? Excuse me. And he said, well, I have some scientific friends who are right now, and again, this was 1980, who are right now working on a possible working model of a time machine. And I went, oh, you just got my attention, Gordon. What? A time machine? And what exactly? We talking George Pell, H.G. Wells, sit in a chair and go into the future? I mean, what are you talking about? He said, well, yeah, they think that theoretically, because we don't know that much about time and how it works, time and space, and so they believe that there is a thing called, and I never forgot this, called orthogonal rotation. Something about how if a thing can somehow rotate in a certain way at a certain velocity, that it can slip the bounds and go one way or the other. So I said to him, do they have a working model yet, your scientific friends? He said, no, but they feel like they're getting closer. And I said, okay, do they think that they can build something that can go in either direction or both directions? And he said, no, they don't really have that figured out yet. They don't think. They say that if somebody would be able to travel through time, they may only be able to go to the past or to the future. So I said to him, Gordon, and he was a family man, I said, Gordon, who would be stupid enough to sit in such a vehicle and take what could possibly be a one-way trip? And he said, you're looking at him. Whoa, okay, that got my attention too. Like, wow. And I said, now wait a minute, Gordo. I mean, are you kidding? You would give up everything just for the challenge of it? He said, don't forget, I'm one of the original group of the right stuff where we would do anything, and many of our friends died during flights of testing new aircraft and propulsion systems. And so, and even today, modern jet fighter pilots today will do almost anything to get to that next level. He said, yeah, any one of us probably would have taken the risk. And that just blew me away. So now that was 1980. How many years ago was that? 80, 90, 2000, almost 30, 40 years ago. If these scientists have still worked on it over the last 30 years, who knows what they can do now, which is all probably part of black budgets, and the public will never know about it. But boy, that just grabbed me out of left field when he said, yeah, working time machine. Why not?
Wow. It's... go ahead.
There's a top theoretical physicist named Lee Smolin. That's Lee capital Smolin. You can search him. He's the top guy working on time right now. Oh. And he says, I'm working on a new theory of time. And he's a really amazing guy. I like him a lot.
Wow. Lee Smolin. I'll check him out. Thank you, Jim.
Well, hey, thanks for the call. I think we had someone saying they were going to call from Europe, but I do appreciate the call, and we are just about ready to wrap up, unless that call comes in within a minute. Gentlemen, it's been so much fun. I've really had such a great night with you guys.
Thank you. When,
Martin.
When does the second hour start now for us?
Yeah, I guess so. Right.
Martin, I should have said this when we were on KGRA, but congratulations. Good job tonight on the premiere show.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Jeez, I'm glad. Luckily, I have Evan behind the scenes doing all the work on the YouTube, so everything seemed to work fine. But I really do. I really had a great time, and I wish I could go another 4 hours. But thanks so much, both of you.
Thank you, Martin.
All right. Oh, does that mean we can actually hang up now?
Yeah, that's it. All right, very good.
I'll talk to you later, David.
Sounds good, Lee.
All right, you take care. All right.
Thanks, Martin.
All right, good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. So you heard me do the outro earlier, but that's it for the show tonight. I want to thank you all so much for hanging in and listening. I thought it was a great one. I'm really excited about tonight's show, and it might be one that I actually listen to again because it was that good, I think. Anyway, next week we'll be back with Dr. Bob Gross. I talked to him out in Phoenix this last February. Real interesting guy. Should be a great show, and we'll be back. Remember, our new time, if you want to watch live, is 6 to 8 p.m. every Tuesday, and that's Eastern Standard Time. Thanks so much. And I want to thank the people that help out with the show. Alejandro, of course. I want to thank our guests, Dave Marler, Lee Spiegel, and James Fox. I want to thank Evan for the working in the background. We have Peggy over doing our Facebook page. Remember to like us on Facebook for all the latest UFO news. It's always posted up there. If someone's interested in doing a guest blog, just email me at martin@podcastufo.com. And thanks so much, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.